All right, so we are nearing the end of the Amidah. Last week, if you recall, we focused on Al Hanisim in honor of Hanukkah. So we're going to kind of return back to our regularly scheduled Amidah. Al Hanisim, if you remember, was kind of inserted into the Hoda'ah blessing. So it was actually pretty well placed. We're going to get to Hoda'ah today. But first, we've got to do Avodah. So in terms of setting, we've got the last three blessings of the Amidah. Every Amidah of the year ends with these three blessings. So Avodah is the first of the three of them. And so let's take a look. And we looked at this Mishnah several times and including mentioning it last week. I want to reiterate it here. It's from Mishnah Tamid, where the Mishnah is describing what used to take place in terms of liturgy in the temple while the temple stood, at least in the later parts of the Second Temple era. And so we have this situation where the deputy high priest is giving instructions to the priests on duty and telling them to recite certain prayers or biblical passages and blessings. And so we see the 10 Commandments and the Shema, the three paragraphs of the Shema, and then they bless the people with three blessings. Emet v'yatziv, which sounds like one of the blessing before the Amidah. Then Avodah, something called Avodah, which means worship, or it's also the word used to describe the temple ritual. And then it says, and the priestly benediction. So we've got these three blessings, Emet v'yatziv, Avodah, and the priestly blessing. And then it adds, on Shabbat, they added a blessing to be said by the watch which was leaving. Okay, so one of the questions that we have to consider when looking at this Mishnah is to what extent is this Mishnah offering some sort of a prototype or a framework that the rabbis utilized for the Amidah? Because most of these elements find their way into the morning liturgy, and in this particular order. Now, there's nothing in here that's describing an Amidah, all right? But we do have this thing called Avodah. So that's what we're going to look at. Now, the prayer that is called the Avodah prayer can be found in our Siddurim. It's on, let's see, for weekdays, it's on page 41 for the Sim Shalom for weekdays. And for
118.
Shabbat, 118.
Let's say I don't know.
All right. So, and in both cases, it appears in the same place on the page. So just to kind of show us exactly what we're looking at. So if you got this Siddur opened, make this a little small. There we go. The top three lines on the page, that's the first paragraph, Ritzeh. And then you have this kind of in slightly smaller text, where it says on Rosh Chodesh and Shabbat Chol HaMoed. This is Ya'alev V'Yavo. This is a special prayer that's added on the new month and on festivals. We're not going to talk about that. And when you get to the end of that, there's two lines, V'techazena, and then it ends with the closing bracha. So when we talk about the Avodah prayer, that's what we're talking about. Those first three lines, and then the final two lines. And what I've done on my screen is I've broken it up by phrase, let's say. All right. So first of all, the opening word ritzeh. What is all right, Shlomo? You know, anybody other than Shlomo know what ratzah means?
Lekabel. Maybe lekabel, to receive.
Yeah. Ani rotzeh.
Rotzeh, I want.
I want, right? I want. So ritzeh is from the same word. So to want something. So what kind of the inverse of wanting something is accepting something, right? So Libby, I want to give you something, right? So if you want it, then you'll accept it from me.
Right.
Right. And so my hope as the giver is that you're going to accept the thing that I've given, that what I'm giving you is something that's wanted by you.
Right.
Okay, so that's our first word. Avodah, as we've talked about many times, is the word that is used to describe the sacrificial ritual system, right? And then the rabbis use the same term to describe worship, prayers. So, and so the opening word ritzeh can already kind of give us some insight about how this might be used. So if you imagine that these priests up on the temple are reciting a prayer that's on the theme of Avodah, and it begins with the word ritzeh, what do you imagine they're praying for?
God to accept the sacrifice.
Right. We're offering all these sacrifices, and we hope you accept them, God. Right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just read the English here. Find favor, Adonai our God, in your people Israel and in their prayer, and return the worship to the sanctuary of your house, and the fire offerings of Israel, and their prayer in love accept with favor. May you find favor always in the service of Israel, your people, and may our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy. Blessed are you, Adonai, who returns his presence to Zion. All right. What are the themes that you see here?
Zion,
Zion, yeah.
right? Return to Zion.
Find favor.
Okay, find favor. That's the word ritzeh, or in various derivations of that word.
It looks like they're wanting the temple to come back.
Okay, we got a return of the temple, and we've seen that come up in quite a few of the prayers in the Amidah. All right, so this Avodah prayer is one of the oldest elements in the Siddur, and we can say that because we saw in the Mishnah that it was something that was recited while the temple stood. Now, I think our question to consider is, what were they actually saying in the temple? Right? What was the prayer that was being recited in the temple when the deputy high priest gave instructions to the priests to say Avodah? What would be the problem with the version as we have it now?
Because it's not
Saying
happening. Oh, sorry.
We're saying accept our prayer as opposed to accept our sacrifice.
Okay, so there's mention of prayer. Yeah, Susan, you were going to say something.
That it's looking forward to a future time, not actually what's happening in the present. So if the priests were saying it in the present, they wouldn't say, let all this happen someday.
And I think you're referring specifically to the restoration of Zion.
Well, the whole second, third,
Yeah, return the worship.
fifth, and sixth,
Yeah, okay. Not to mention the fact that the temple, if the temple is standing, why would you be asking God to rebuild it?
And I don't understand why the rabbis would choose this kind of format, because the rabbis shouldn't be looking for a return to the temple, right? When they're establishing another form.
Yeah, we've seen that tension before, where the rabbis, they certainly talk about the temple, but they also talk about prayer as a substitute, and a valid substitute, and perhaps even a better substitute than the sacrifices were.
And so this prayer, if I were the rabbi, I wouldn't put it in.
You would delete it.
I would
You
make
would
it
delete.
another one.
Okay.
Now, wouldn't they, I mean, back then, right after the destruction or whatever, wouldn't they be yearning for the days back when? And what they were doing is finding a substitute that they thought maybe was temporary?
That's possible, although we don't know exactly when this was written, like in the format that we have it now, right? And as we've seen with many of these prayers, that it's very gradual, and that in the earliest phases we're dealing much more with general themes than we are with specific language.
Now, is this translation, like, I know some of the translations in our Sim Shalom, the translations are a little different than the
This,
Hebrew. Is
this translation is my hyperliteral translation,
Okay, thanks.
and somewhat awkward in the English. So, but that's going to be important. So, all right, let's see if we can unpack this. We've got a problem. The Chatima, which is the ending, the final bracha, says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, hamachazir shechinato leTzion," the one who returns his Shekhinah to Zion. Right? So you've probably heard this language of God's presence residing in the temple, right? The Bible talks about, in Deuteronomy especially, the place that God chooses his name to dwell. So there's this idea that there's the kind of the manifestation of God's presence as kind of captured by the term Shekhinah, and that the Shekhinah resides in the Holy of Holies, right? And so when the temple was destroyed, then the Shekhinah goes into exile along with Israel. So when the prayer asks God to return his Shekhinah to Zion, we're asking, it's a way of saying we want the temple to be rebuilt so that God's presence can be returned to that space, along with the restored sacrificial system. So that doesn't fit, as we've kind of talked about a little bit, that doesn't fit in with the concept of a temple that still exists. So it's probably safe to say that when the deputy high priest told the priests in the temple to say Avodah, they did not say this blessing. Right? I'm comfortable making that declaration. All right. So let's see if we can figure out which parts of this prayer might fit before the destruction. Right? So if you were going to take this prayer as a frame, the framework of a prayer that could be said while a temple is standing, what would you include? What would you exclude? All right, let's go with maybe the first sentence by line by line. Right, find favor, Adonai our God, in your people Israel and in their prayers.
I would put period at Israel.
Yeah.
All right, so you get rid of "and in their prayer," Susan?
I wouldn't. Because I don't think that they're praying.
You don't think they're praying? Okay.
Or is there a blessing involved with the sacrifice, so that would be included? I think that could go either way.
All right. Let's go to the next line. Return the worship to the sanctuary of your house.
That's only after it's gone.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Submit
Next
them
one,
to
and the
God.
fire offerings of Israel and their prayer and love accept with favor.
Yes.
Yes.
Want to keep that? All right.
Except, okay.
Mike, go ahead.
I would change prayer to sacrifice.
Yes.
Okay.
Me too.
But isn't sacrifice a way of praying? Isn't that how they prayed to God?
I mean, that's the rabbi's big innovation, is that they said that not only can any person say a prayer and it take the place of the sacrifice, but the entire mandatory system of sacrifices that was performed by this elite caste of priests is now going to be replaced by a prayer liturgy that is recited by everybody. And not only that, has to be recited by everybody. They frame this in terms of halacha. So that's a big change.
Right. But to me, when they sacrificed and the high priest said the prayer for the people, that is a form of prayer.
Yeah, but it's much more like, let's say in a Catholic service where it's the priest who's doing all of the praying.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's lots of things that can only be done by the priest.
Right.
Right. So yeah, and that's probably similar to what took place in the temple.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Okay.
since prayer is Tefilah, what word do you think could have been in the place of prayer if they were referring specifically to sacrifices?
In the second, in which line? The third line?
Like in the third one or the first one?
Unclear. Let's keep going. We did the third line, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And fourth line. May you find favor always in the service of Israel, your people.
That can be before
Keep it.
or after.
I keep that. All right. And may our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy.
Scratch.
Dump it, right? And then finally, the last one we already talked about. Okay. Let's get rid of those three. For now.
Whoops. I just
Right.
lost.
So we're getting return the worship. May our eyes behold your return to Zion, returns is present to Zion, right? And what do these things all have in common? We got returning, okay, coming back.
Mhm.
So let's consolidate here. Now we've got these 3 lines, but we have a redundancy, right? What is redundant? And we've kind of already picked up on this a bit.
Favor.
It's prayer, right?
Right.
Find favor in their prayer in the first line and the second line. Utfilatam be'ahava tekabel b'ratzon, and their prayer in love accept with favor, right? So ritzeh and ratzon, same word.
Mhm.
Tefilah, tefilah, same word. The second one adds be'ahava tekabel. So be'ahava is in love, and then tekabel is accept. So that accepting with favor is that's kind of redundant in itself as well. So the only element that's different is love, but that's kind of redundant also, because if we're asking God to find favor, that's kind of implied is that God is doing this as an act of love, and specifically as an act of covenantal love. So so that's, and then as people pointed out, we wouldn't expect the priests to be talking about the prayers of the people Israel in something like this. So let's remove those as well. All right. So we're gonna remove uvitfilatam, and we're gonna remove utfilatam be'ahava, right? Their prayer, and then here their prayer in love. All right. So if we're going to remove that as during the temple prayer, why would the rabbis add it afterwards?
Because it's a substitute.
Right, it's a substitute, right? By including this in a prayer that's talking about sacrifices, we're putting them on the same level. We're saying that prayer and sacrifices are comparable, right? So we've equated fire offerings and prayer, and that now we've associated, just as sacrifices are associated with acceptance, so too prayer is associated with acceptance and love, right? So if the priests at one time, they made their sacrifices and then they asked God, may you find favor in our sacrifices, we're doing the same thing. And this is coming at the end of the Amidah. All of these prayers that we've just said, these are like our sacrifice that we've just offered before you, and now we ask that you accept it.
Rabbi, I have maybe an Uber question on this. So I think the priests were doing sacrifices continually, but people didn't spend their days at the synagogue. So how come we move prayer that you have to do 3 times a day? That's an obligation on people to emulate the sacrifices that the priests were doing. When we had the temple, we weren't engaged in that. They were doing their thing and we were tilling the fields.
Right.
So we could have had the rabbis taking the substitute to be the priests, and their job, I'm thinking of like some Buddhist thing, that their job is to sit there chanting all day long while everybody goes around their business.
Why didn't the rabbis make it more elite?
Yes.
Right.
And why did they make us do so much praying when we didn't have to do that before?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And because I would imagine that there were plenty of Jews after the destruction of the temple who did not, were not so eager to have all of these extra obligations placed upon them.
Hello, not just in those days. How about in 2020?
And it took some time for the rabbinic, the rabbinic agenda to really take hold in, among the masses. Hundreds of years, in fact, it took. You're asking people who, before could kind of just count on the temple ritual taking place on my behalf, and I'm going to send in my taxes to support it, but I know that they're doing what they need to do in order to keep us in God's good graces.
And especially, you know, the three pillars. So Avodah is one of the three
Mhm.
pillars. So somewhere in our mind, we have that it's necessary for that to happen in order for the world to be in balance, right?
Mhm.
So, whoa.
Yeah. So the rabbis, so but they shifted. It's a very egalitarian move that the rabbis make.
But what I find difficult is that the sacrifices, yes, they were ongoing by the elite. But in order to participate in that, you'd have to schlep all the way to Jerusalem. Whereas prayer you can do wherever you are.
Yes. Or you could send your taxes.
Is that the same as prayer?
No, like I mean, when the temple stood, right?
Yes.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it makes it portable, right? We don't need a temple for that.
Which is why they did it, right? Because of the destruction of the temple.
Or
And we're in Galut.
that's suggesting that it was let's say a strategic decision, right? In order to keep the Jewish people cohesive and to allow Judaism to survive, we need to make it portable in this way. So maybe that's how I've been over characterizing it that way, as opposed to thinking about the sacrifices as something that needs to continue happening in order to keep the world spinning on its foundation.
There you go.
Right. And if the temple doesn't exist and we can't do that, something is off in the cosmos. Right. And in order to keep it, keep things moving, keep the world spinning the way it's supposed to spin, we're going to come up with something that's going to accomplish the same goal as the sacrifices. And we're going to do it in such a way that it involves everyone, or at least all the men.
That's so radical.
So,
It is.
yeah, it's courageous. I mean, it's a huge change. All right, but we're talking about before that happened. So we're going to get rid of the prayers. And this is what we're left with. Find favor, Adonai our God, in your people Israel. In the fire offerings of Israel, accept with favor. May you find favor always in the service of Israel, your people. All right, so what do you notice now? We haven't added anything to this prayer. We've only taken away.
It's asking for favor in every line.
Okay, we've got some repetition. Ritzei, tekabel baratzon, and utihila ratzon. Right? Now that is very consistent with biblical style. Right? We see this all over the place in the Psalms, where we see this in the parallelism, right? We say a line and then we say another line, altering the words a bit, but we'll often see those words included. And in this case, look at the first two lines. Ritzei, we start with Ritzei and now we end with Ratzon. So think about it as A, B, B, A, right? That's very biblical in style. So, this is not a quote of the Bible, but it is emulating that style. Now, how about the themes?
Actually, what does it mean by the service of Israel? That's not good deeds.
All right,
Right?
let's look at the Hebrew. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu be'amcha Yisrael. So Ritzei, find favor, right? Lord our God, be'amcha Yisrael, in your people Israel. That's the first line. Second line, v'ishei Yisrael, and the Ishei Yisrael, the fire offerings of Israel, tekabel baratzon, accept them with ratzon, with favor. And then the third one, utehila ratzon, tamid avodat Yisrael amecha, and may it be for favor, tamid, always, avodat Yisrael amecha. So avodah, that's our word. That's the name that the rabbis give to this prayer. It's the name that the Mishnah identifies that the priests are doing. Avodah, that means the sacrificial system, right? The sacrificial service of Israel, your people.
So there's redundancy in 3 and 2 then.
Maybe. Let's look at this word tamid. Okay. Tamid means always. But tamid also means something specific. right? We've brought it up before. I'm curious if anybody remembers what a tamid is.
Ner tamid.
Ner tamid, yeah.
Eternal.
Continually?
Eternal life.
Continually. Why is it called the ner tamid?
Because it burns forever.
The eternal flame.
No.
No?
No. The
Well,
Ner Tamid in our synagogue is really just capturing the name of what the Ner Tamid used to be, which was the menorah.
Oh.
All right, we just got done with
What was
Hanukkah.
it?
The Ner Tamid was the daily Tamid offering. Right?
But it wasn't continuous light. It was a continuous daily offering.
It was a day, yeah, it was an offering that had to be presented every single day. One element of that was the lighting of the 7-branched menorah outside of the Holy of Holies. Right? Every single day of the year. Now, it may still be lit from the day before, but it may not be. It may have gone out, and it doesn't really matter if it went out or not. It has to be relit.
So sorry.
All right. So, since we're talking about something that is during the temple's standing, maybe tamid doesn't mean always. Maybe it's referring to the tamid offering specifically. All right? So it's the daily offering. So let's translate it. May you find favor in the tamid of the service of Israel, your people.
Oh,
Okay. So now we've got these 3 lines. What is the theme of each line? Line 1, your people Israel. Line 2, the fire offerings of Israel. Line 3, the tamid of the service of your people Israel. Right? We want that daily offering. We want you to accept it. Right? So now we've got the term Yisrael appearing in each of the 3 lines, and we have a progression. Each of them is referring to something very specific. Right? The first one is very general for the people. The next one has to do with the fire offerings. And the final one is this daily offering, all of which the priests have a central role in on behalf of the Jewish people. Sorry. And so what's the other piece is that Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu tekabel baratzon u'tehila ratzon. Right? So we have the same theme in each of the 3 lines as well, right? So it's a masterfully constructed short prayer with 3 elements to it. Any thoughts or reactions?
Hello. Hi, sweetie pie. What's up?
And I would add that I think it works as is. So we can take what is in our Siddur today and see what the rabbis added in a post-destruction world. And then we can see what's left, and we can, I think, get a pretty good sense of what they might have been saying while the temple stood. And this might very well be an accurate reflection of what the Mishnah was talking about when it's describing the priests every day reciting an Avodah prayer of some sort.
So Rabbi, where I'm trying to find it in my current prayer book now, the stuff you have in red.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find that in the prayer book.
All right. So looking in our Siddur, the first 3 words are Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu, and then the next 2 are Be'amcha Yisrael. So that's exactly the same. Exact same first 5 words. And then we've got to skip all the way to here's the problem.
NBC.
All right. Let's come back to your question, Cindy.
Okay.
Is that we're missing something in our Siddur? We are missing something in our Siddur.
Thank you so much.
All right, but we still need a chatima,
Love
right?
you.
A closing blessing
Bye-bye.
of some sort. So it's off to the Geniza we go. Right? We need a new chatima. All right, so this is the same fragment. This is the same Siddur we've looked at earlier. It's a different page. I believe it's a different page. Yeah, so if you remember the one where it was the Amidah from the land of Israel that had 18 blessings, not 19, and it combined two of them, and it included the blessing against the heretics. This is the same Siddur, right? It dates to the 10th to 11th century. So let's zoom in on the critical section. All right, so you can read it. Here, I'll put my, do you see my,
Yeah.
Okay. So there's Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu, right? That's the same, right? Find favor, Adonai our God. And then it says, Ushchon B'Tzion. And Shchon is dwell. This is connected to the word Shechina. Shchon, it's a command form. Dwell in Zion. V'ya'avruch avadecha. Or V'ya'avrucha avadecha v'Yerushalayim. V'ya'avducha. V'ya'avducha avadecha v'Yerushalayim. V'ya'avducha is they will worship you, avadecha, your servants. Eved, your servant, and vayavducha, they will worship you, are actually the same root, right? Serve, maybe, your servants will serve you, right? But really, here we're talking about worship. It's the Avodah prayer. So your servants will worship you in Jerusalem. I'll just kind of go back to the whole sentence. Find favor, Adonai, our God, and dwell in Zion so that your servants may worship you in Jerusalem. And then we get the closing blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otach b'yirah na'avod. Right? So blessed are you, Adonai. She'otach is that you, b'yirah, in fear or in awe, na'avod, we will worship. So blessed are you, Adonai, that we may worship you in awe. All right. So this is very different than our closing blessing. Ours was Hamachazir Shechinato L'Tzion, who returns his Shekhinah to Zion, which those themes appear in the prayer. It's just that the language of the blessing is very different, right? That we may worship you in awe, right? So this is our closing, our closing blessing in the Geniza. So, and then the other thing is that tenses are somewhat fungible in ancient Hebrew. So na'avod could be future tense. You might also make a case for it being present tense. And so a possible suggestion for if we're going to try and reconstruct this original prayer is something like this blessing was in fact the Chatima, right? Because our assumption is that a liturgy from the land of Israel is going to have a better provenance, let's say, more accurate provenance than something out in Babylonia. So if we're going to translate this, blessed are you, Adonai, whom we serve with awe. And that fits, I think, perfectly with the rest of the language of the kind of the reconstructed prayer. And not only that, but it ends with the word na'avod, that we serve or we worship, which is the title of the prayer. So in a lot of ways, it fits better than what's in our Siddur now.
Are there any ancient scripts that have this whole reconstructed prayer in it from at that time?
Not that I am aware of. I will add, if you have the Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat, and you go to 175, this is in the Amidah, the Musaf Amidah that we say on Yom Tov. And Yom Tov, in Ashkenazi tradition outside of the land of Israel, we duchen, right? So the priests, the Kohanim, go up onto the bima, and exactly, Susan, yeah, the nenu. We use the ancient blessing. We're going to talk about that ancient blessing shortly. But when we do that, there is a slight alteration to the Amidah when the Shaliach Tzibor says it. And so if you look on 175, you'll see kind of in the middle of the page where the V'techazena, that's normally the ending of the Avodah prayer, but there's an asterisk. And the asterisk takes us down, and it says, during repetition of the Amidah, in congregations where Kohanim chant the threefold blessing from the Bima, substitute the following. So we have a little bit larger paragraph. What does it include? It includes the word Hashev Shechinatcha L'Tzion Yircha, return your Shechina to Zion, your city. That sounds a lot like the Geniza. Let's back up. Shchon B'Tzion, right? Come to dwell in Zion. Here it says Hashev, return your Shechina to Zion, your city. And then V'Seder HaAvodah L'Yerushalayim, the order of the Avodah to Jerusalem, right? And here we have V'Avducha Avadecha B'Yerushalayim, that your servants may serve you in Jerusalem. And what is the closing blessing? Baruch atah Adonai she'otcha levadcha b'yirah na'avod. So blessed are you, Adonai, she'otcha, same. It adds levadcha in our Siddur, alone. Levadcha is alone. And then b'yirah na'avod, which is exactly the same as what we have here. In awe, we will worship. So what this suggests is that in the Ashkenazi tradition, something of this prayer that we see in the Geniza was preserved and is included when we duchen, right? And now something else is that it's tradition in the land of Israel for Ashkenazim and Sephardim to duchen at every single Amidah. So the fact that we see this prayer recited during the Amidah in the land of Israel, when they were duchening, and then we see in the Ashkenazi tradition where we're doing a very similar kind of a prayer whenever we do duchen. It kind of fits together. All right, so
Now, I thought they duchened every Shabbat. I didn't realize it was even weekdays.
every Amidah.
Wow.
I mean, you mean that seriously? Like what? I don't know.
Sorry, for Shachar, in the morning, for the morning service, not for Mincha. All right.
Okay.
One more problem. Not necessarily a problem. Well, no, it is a problem. Cindy, you pointed out that you were having trouble finding all three of those lines earlier. And the reason you were having trouble finding all three of those lines is because this term in red, the Ishei Yisrael, is not in our Siddur Sim Shalom.
Ah.
I'm guessing it's not in Mishkan Tefilah either.
No.
The Ishei Yisrael, the fire offerings of Israel, right? So this was removed from conservative Siddurim as early as the 1940s and has been absent in all of them since, except for the New Lev Shalem, which I think brought it back in some.
I had a question in that one because I noticed in brackets it said fiery offerings everywhere, and I didn't know what the brackets meant and if that meant we should include it or not include it.
Yeah, it's Ishei Yisrael. Now, absolutely, this was originally there, right? In an Orthodox Siddur, the Ishei Yisrael is absolutely part of this prayer. The conservative movement removed it, as did probably all of the modern non-Orthodox movements. Why? Why? Because it's explicitly talking about sacrifices, right? And that's a general theme that direct praying for a return of the sacrifices as a way to worship God is something that has been kind of expunged from many of the prayers. And so you have some prayers where it's just been removed entirely. In other cases, the tense has been shifted. So for example, in the Musaf, Amidah, and Shabbat, there's a prayer that traditionally asks God to, so that we will continue, we will once again offer sacrifices to you. And the Siddur Sim Shalom changed it from future tense to past tense in the place where we used to offer sacrifices to you. Right? So for similar reasons, talking about, we want God to accept our fiery offerings, right? So that doesn't really belong in our Siddur, if we don't actually want a return to the sacrificial system.
But Sim Shalom doesn't remove all the other references to.
It does remove all references to praying to return the sacrifices.
Okay.
But why would we? Oh, it's such tension here. It's just such tension. So we pray for the reestablishment of the temple, or we mourn the destruction of the temple. Yeah. We want to go back to the I mean, that's all nice, but we don't want to go back to slaughtering animals. So that kind of, I don't know how you deal with that to maintain. If you put it all in the sense of history, once upon a time we were people at a temple and this is how we prayed, but that isn't what we do anymore. And then you can't say, and we hope one day that we will all return to Israel and the temple will be reestablished and your presence will dwell among us. You can't have it both ways. And yet.
Well, when we say words like that, do we mean them literally or metaphorically? Right? There are plenty of people who are, I would say, very conservative in terms of liturgically, right? We don't want to change the traditional words of the Siddur, that we want to maintain that continuity. And yet I don't believe, I wouldn't express this belief literally, right? So I'm going to choose to read it metaphorically. And I think that's perfectly legitimate to do so. I mean, this is using poetic or kind of quasi-poetic language, and that's how poetry works. It speaks in metaphor. So I can talk about, restoring the fire offerings and recognize that this is, representing some sort of, a return of a direct relationship, a more direct relationship with God, of a physical, something physical more than just the words of prayer. I can think about that. But I want to restore V'Ishe Yisrael. And in fact, when I daven, I say V'Ishe Yisrael, right? Proudly. I do it in my personal Amidah. When I recite the Amidah out loud, I add the V'Ishe Yisrael right here. And I am going to show you why I do so with absolutely zero reservations and no need whatsoever to read this as a metaphor.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
All right. Ishe Yisrael. So why do we call this the fiery offerings of Israel? Because Aish means fire. Right? Ishe would be plural, fires, I guess. Although there isn't even really, is there a plural for fire? I don't really think so.
Well, it's fire.
Shlomo, how would you say fires in Hebrew?
In plural, you mean?
Yeah.
Esh. And the plural is, I don't know.
Right, exactly, right? So Ishe is kind of weird. And yet, but Ishe appears all over the priestly texts, right? If you read Leviticus and you read all the catalogs of sacrifices, you're going to find this word Ishe lots of places. So here's the problem, is that Ishe doesn't mean fire. It looks like Aish, but in the Bible, it comes from a different root. It does not come from the Hebrew root for Aish. It comes from the Ugaritic. I think I would translate recite this as Itht.
Say it again.
Itht. Itht, right? So, and it means gift, right? And this Jacob Milgram is responsible for, I guess, publicizing this etymology of the word Ishe, and he does it by looking at all the places where Ishe is used in the Torah, where it is used and where it isn't used. And what he finds is that it it is not used in specific place. Sorry, it is not used in places where if it meant fire offerings, you would expect it to be used, and it is used in places which are describing sacrifices which are not burnt up, right? And so based on that, he says that the origin of this is not from Aish, it's from the Ugaritic Ift, right? And Ugaritic, this was a Semitic language. Much of ancient Hebrew comes from the either Ugaritic or Akkadian, like it's one of those kind of ancient languages. So Ishe Yisrael would better translate it, at least in terms of what its pshat meaning in the biblical context, as the gifts of Israel, right? These are the gifts that Israel brings, right?
But that's still sacrifices, isn't it? In meaning.
Yeah, but it refers, so in those times, gifts of Israel would refer to all the sacrifices that would be offered to God as gifts, right? So I'll give an example. A sin offering is burnt up on the altar. You wouldn't describe a sin offering though as a gift, right? The purpose of a sin offering is to remove the pollution which sin has brought upon the altar. It's not a gift. It's really a cleansing thing, and that's why Ishe is never used to describe the sin offering, right? Because it's not a fire. It doesn't mean fire offering, right? It means it's a gift. And there are other categories of offerings that are you would describe as gifts. So if this means the gifts of Israel, then a better translation would be, and the gifts of Israel and their prayer in love except with favor, right? And I don't need to think about sacrifice to think about giving gifts to God, right? So what would giving a gift to God be? You could say that acts of tzedakah and chesed are in some sense gifts of God, right? We want God to accept the things that we do as being, signs of our being in relationship with God, and our both gratitude as well as emulating the qualities of God that we're supposed to emulate.
But Rabbi, how does that come in with our, we'll need whatever to contribute our first son to the temple or to God?
That's Pidyon Haben. Well, we don't use the term Ishe to describe the Pidyon Haben. That's the redemption of the firstborn son, because before the priestly system, the hereditary priestly system was in place, it was a firstborn system. So the firstborns were the ones who would serve God. And when the priests kind of took over, the firstborn still belonged to God technically and had to be redeemed from God. And so we have this ritual of the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn son, where if a parent has a firstborn son, they have to essentially buy their son back from the priest for 5 silver shekels.
Well, it's a good thing that this didn't go up with our regular inflation, or be very
Oh yeah.
difficult.
Right. Although the price, yeah.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
On one hand, the conservative movement, they took some parts of the prayer that have to do with the sacrifices. On the other hand, when we, after Kriyat Torah, when we return the Torah to the Ark, we all sing together, Ashivenu Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
Yeah.
When we say Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, it means exactly these things.
Oh, not necessarily. So Shlomo said when we put the Torah back in the Ark, we sing Eitz Chaim Hi, and the last line Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, which is return us, Adonai, to you, that we may return. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, renew our days as of old.
Which means with the sacrifices.
Oh, maybe. I'm not sure that that's true. There's no mention of sacrifice in that prayer. It's from Proverbs, I think.
There's no mention, but what you mean that we're going to renew our days of old.
Yeah, I think it's a restored relationship between the Jewish people and God, the way we kind of mythically talk about in ancient times. But that passage is, I think, from Proverbs, and Proverbs doesn't say anything about. I mean, Proverbs is not about sacrifices. Proverbs is about wisdom, and living the the right kind of pious life guided by wisdom. It's a very kind of intellectual, kind of moral intellectual book. So, I mean, there's other examples where we didn't like. So if there's biblical passages that are included in the liturgy, the conservative movement didn't change those, right? So in Musaf, like there's certain, like when we say Uvayom Shabbat, right? We're quoting the Torah and we're talking about the sacrifices that are offered on Shabbat. But that's because we're quoting Torah, right? So obviously they're not going to change the language of Torah. So the rabbinic language, they're more comfortable changing.
But we have that whole section about sacrifices in the Amida, in the Musaf Amida.
Yes, right. And those are the parts that are about sacrifices in the Musaf Amidah refer either quote the Torah, and we're not going to change the quote, it's a direct quote, or change the future tense to past tense.
I thought we only did that in the translation.
No, it's in the Hebrew.
So
instead of saying na'aseh v'nakriv, which is we will do and we will offer, right? We will do and we will sacrifice. It says asu v'hikrivu, they did and they offered, right? So we're describing the ritual that our ancestors used to do, but we're not praying for us to be able to do that ourselves.
So when that prayer was like in the Orthodox Siddur, I guess when it's not they did. I mean, I can see that as the way the conservative movement changed it. It's like, well, we can't do it now that there's no temple. So it's actually more appropriate to say it the way the conservative Siddur says it.
Well, except but the purpose of the prayer, that particular paragraph, I'll go to it. Actually, it's even on Shabbat. So yeah, so we're talking about the Musaf Amidah. And it's on page 158. So it's the second paragraph. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, Hameshiv Banim Gulam, who returns children to their borders. Shetalenu v'simcha la'artzenu, you'll bring us up in joy to our land. V'titaenu bigvulenu, you'll plant us inside of our borders. Shesham asu avotenu lefanecha korbanetehem, that there our ancestors did before you their sacrifices. Tamidim, there's our word tamid. Tamidim kisidram umusafim kihilchatam. The tamid offerings in their order, in their proper way, and the musafim, the musaf ones in their proper way. The musaf ones would be the extra ones that we did on Shabbat and festivals. Kihilchatam, according to their halacha. Ve'et musaf yom HaShabbat hazeh, and the musaf, right, the additional sacrifice of Yom HaShabbat hazeh, of this Sabbath day. Then it says in our Siddur, asu v'hikrivu lefanecha be'ava k'mitzvat ritzonecha. All right, they did and they sacrificed before you in love according to the commandment of your will, as it is written in your Torah by the hand of Moses, your servant, and from the mouth of your glory, as it says, right? But in an Orthodox Siddur, it'll say,
Nice.
And the Musaf of this Yom HaShabbat, Na'aseh v'nakriv, we will do and we will offer before you in love, or maybe may we do and may we offer before you in love, according to the command by your will, as it is written in your Torah, etc. So what it does is it transforms this prayer. It's saying that, okay, we have this whole system of offering sacrifices. We want to have the privilege of being able to do that once again, because God, you wrote it in your Torah, right? This is what you want us to do. So we're praying that we should be able to do that, right? That's But the traditional languages and the conservative movement changed it to more of a historical narrative. This is what they used to do. And by us describing what they did at one time, it's as if we're doing that today, even though we're not asking, we're not trying to go back to that system of worship. We like the system that we've got that we've got now, but we can maybe have merit in the traditions of our ancestors.
There's also an alternative selection, which is never read because
Right.
we always read the
An
normal one.
alternative, well, I'm sure you probably do that one, Miriam.
Yes.
Yeah, and it removes all mention of sacrifices. That's at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so that is probably the right place for us to stop. I want to say one more thing about the Ve'ishe Yisrael term. When I was in rabbinical school in 2003, I don't know which student it was, but there was a student who I guess read Jacob Milgram's commentary and about the word Ishe not coming from fire offering, but instead coming from the Ugaritic, meaning gift, and suggesting that we should actually be going back to the traditional language of the liturgy, since this is not, in fact, a direct, reference to going back to sacrifices. And there was, I think, at the time, I don't know if there still is among students, but a desire for, let's say, authenticity in our worship. And so there is a synagogue on campus, and they're davening every day, and so the chancellor of the seminary, who at the time was Ismar Shorsh, he is the Mara Da'atra of the seminary. So he's the halachic decider for that service, and so he was presented with Milgram's commentary and say, look, we're conservative Jews, like we study this stuff, and we have to be authentic and stuff, and there's here this means gifts, so we should put this back in. And so he actually
13 hours.
He changed the policy and allowed for students to put that back in as kind of an officially sanctioned permission. And I think it was during a mincha when he made service, when he made that I guess publicly said that. There's he wrote a Dvar Torah about it that year as well. I am very I don't know, I wouldn't say certain, I think it is highly probable that the re-inclusion of this term Ve'ishe Yisrael in the newest Siddur Lev Shalem of the conservative movement is because of that.
Interesting.
Right? Cindy, you had pulled it out earlier, right? And you saw it in brackets?
I didn't pull it out, but I remember it from when I was davening on the high holidays.
Ah, yes.
The box store.
Let me go grab it. Yeah.
While you're searching, Rabbi, what's the nadav? What's the strange fires that they bring to the temple? What's that
Zara. Yes, that word is Aish. Yeah, that word is definitely Aish, and there they're talking about the incense offering, which in fact is a fire offering, right? It is burned up. When the rabbis, or when someone, probably this term Ishe Yisrael, it's in the Torah and it's being used by the priests in the Second Temple. What do they think it means? They probably think it means the fire offerings of Israel. They probably don't know the Ugaritic origins of the word, and that's okay. Yeah, words can have multiple meanings, and we see this all the time. The Bible itself will often provide explanations for etymologies of words which are actually incorrect, right? And maybe even intentionally incorrect. So like the name Yisrael, struggles with God, probably means something more like Prince of God rather than struggles with God. But the explanation that the Torah gives for Yisrael is struggles with God. So that's the meaning that the Torah wants us to take from that. Okay, let's... Oh, it's not here in the morning service. Let's see if it's in Musaf. That's not here either. Maybe it's just the Machzor.